Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into a fascinating ancient text today to uncover some seriously profound insights on something we all deal with: surviving unfair suffering. We're going to look at finding God's hidden purpose when things go completely dark. The ancient story of Joseph is basically a masterclass in resilience and integrity, so let's get right into it.
It's a pretty provocative question, isn't it? Where is God when you're punished for doing the exact right thing? We all kind of want to believe that doing the right thing brings an immediate reward. But looking at the biblical narrative of Joseph in Genesis, we see this wildly unfair scenario play out in real time. And honestly, the answers we find here might just flip how you view your own hardships. Section 1, The Tragedy of 17. Let's start by looking at this dramatic descent and how fast a perfectly good life can just fall apart. The sheer speed of this freefall is staggering. At age 17, he's the favored son of Jacob, famously wearing that coat of many colors. But literally days later, his own brothers, completely blinded by jealousy, betray him and throw him into a pit. Weeks later, he's trafficked, sold off as a slave to merchants heading for Egypt. And it doesn't even stop there. Years later, he's wrongfully thrown into the king's prison. We're talking about a beloved, sheltered teenager becoming a chained, enslaved foreigner in the blink of an eye. 20. That is how many years his father, Jacob, grieved. The brothers actually fabricated evidence. They showed Jacob a blood-stained coat to manipulate him into thinking his favorite son had been torn apart by a wild animal. So this trauma wasn't just Joseph's. This lie fractured an entire family for 2 whole decades. Yet, even at absolute rock bottom, the story takes a crazy turn. Section 2, Temptation in the Palace. Think about what's actually happening here. The text explicitly tells us that God was with Joseph, making him prosper so much that his Egyptian master Potiphar trusted him with the entire estate. This is absolutely crucial. God was blessing Joseph right in the middle of his slavery. He didn't just teleport Joseph out of Egypt. Instead, he gave him immense success and power right where he was, as a slave managing a massive household. But, success often paints a target on your back, bringing a totally new trial. Potiphar's wife noticed the handsome, successful young manager and started this relentless campaign to seduce him. The text says, though she spoke to Joseph day after day. So this wasn't just a one-time thing. It was a daily, high-stakes psychological pressure cooker. And this gives us Joseph's brilliant defense strategy. It's an absolute blueprint for keeping your integrity intact. First, he remembers his earthly duties. He explicitly tells her that Potiphar trusted him with everything. Second, he remembers his ultimate loyalty is to God. And third, as we'll see, he knew exactly when to physically run away. It's this incredible mix of psychological and physical defense that we can absolutely apply today when the pressure ramps up. He basically draws a definitive moral line in the sand, asking, how could I do such a great evil and sin against God? He didn't just see giving in as betraying his boss, he saw it as a direct offense against his creator. It just shows this profound reverence for God that totally overpowered the lure of a quick, hidden thrill. Which brings us to Section 3, Fleeing from Temptation. Let's look at the physical reality of his defense. Because honestly, sometimes you just can't argue with temptation. Picture this. One day, the house is completely empty. She corners him, literally grabbing his clothing, demanding he sleep with her. Joseph knew he couldn't talk his way out of this. He didn't try to flex his willpower and just stand there resisting. He literally ran for his life, leaving his outer garment right there in her hands. It's amazing because this ancient reaction perfectly models what the Apostle Paul would later tell Timothy, to actively flee youthful lusts. If you're a young person today, or really anyone dealing with intense temptation, this is a game changer. You've got to rely on God's strength, not just your own willpower. Keeping that close relationship with God is what helps you spot the trap before it snaps, and gives you the guts to just run. But here is the absolute gut punch. The immediate reward for his total integrity wasn't a promotion. It was false accusations and jail time. Potiphar's wife felt rejected, so she flipped the script, using the cloak he left behind as fake evidence of an assault. Joseph's earthly reward for doing the exact right thing? Being thrown straight into a brutal, chained Egyptian dungeon. No trial, no defense, just prison. This leads us to a massive paradigm shift in Section 4, Grace in Adversity. We really need to rethink how we view blessings.
Check out this contrast. It is completely mind-blowing. You have Joseph physically chained up in a dark Egyptian dungeon, yet spiritually, he is completely free. He has a clear conscience and God's absolute favor. Then look at his brothers. Years later, they're physically free men walking around Canaan, but they are spiritually locked up. They're paralyzed by guilt, constantly looking over their shoulders in terror, asking, "What has God done to us?"
And this highlights what theologians call the blessing shift. Notice the literary bookends in Genesis chapter 39. It starts by saying the Lord was with Joseph when he's sold into slavery. Then, after he's falsely accused and thrown into the dungeon, the chapter ends with those exact same words, the Lord was with him. Theologian Don Carson points out something profound here. God often blesses us within our hardship, rather than instantly pulling us out of it. The grace is actually right there in the darkness of the trial. To bring this into our world today, Don Carson shares a really touching personal story. His father cared for his wife as she battled Alzheimer's for many years. But instead of getting totally consumed by bitterness or constantly looking for a way out, he found profound grace in the tiny, faithful, everyday acts of love. True faithfulness often means standing strong and loving right where you are, even when the circumstances are agonizingly hard. Finally, let's zoom way out for Section 5, the big picture, to see exactly why all of this had to happen. We really need to grasp the idea of divine providence. This is God's unseen, overarching guidance in human history. It means God can take the absolute worst, most unfair human actions, like brothers selling off their own sibling, or a spiteful lie landing an innocent guy in jail, and actually weave them into a perfectly good, sovereign plan. Joseph's pain felt totally senseless in the moment, but it was deeply, purposefully providential. Think about it. By surviving slavery and the dungeon with his integrity intact, Joseph was eventually elevated to supreme power in Egypt. And why? Because a massive, catastrophic famine was coming. Joseph was put in the exact perfect position to save entire nations from starving, including his own family. He literally preserved the bloodline of Abraham, the very lineage that would eventually lead to Jesus. Which brings us to Genesis 50:20. Pretty much the mic drop moment of this entire explainer. Speaking to his terrified brothers years later, Joseph says, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." Human malice is real, and it hurts, but God's redemptive purpose is always infinitely greater. He was literally orchestrating salvation through Joseph's suffering. So what's the ultimate takeaway here? It's this: grace isn't always an exit door. Sometimes it is the strength to thrive right there inside the cell. It totally redefines what it means to be blessed, proving that God is actively working in your hardest moments, shaping you for a purpose you can't even see yet. So I'll leave you with this to chew on. Look at your own current prison, whatever hardship or unfair situation you're dealing with right now. Can you shift your perspective? Instead of just begging for an immediate escape, can you look for God's hidden purpose and grace right where you are today? How might your current struggles be the exact mechanism God is using for a much larger, beautiful plan? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really encourage you to keep looking for that hidden grace.